The battlefield smelled like burnt copper and something older, something that had no name in any human language but sat in the back of Marcus Vale's throat the way ozone does before a lightning strike. He had learned to pay attention to that smell over 14 months on this moon. It meant the Kethra were close, or that something they had built was close, which was increasingly the same thing. He was crouched behind an overturned supply crawler on the edge of the choosing ground, his rifle balanced across his knees, watching the ceremony that was about to end his life or define the rest of it. The rifle was more habit than plan. You didn't bring a rifle onto a choosing ground to use it. You brought it because you were a soldier and soldiers brought rifles the way other people brought keys, out of an ingrained certainty that you would need them the moment you left them behind. The choosing ground was a ring of flat obsidian stone 200 meters wide, carved into the plateau above the capital city of Voreth's third moon. Ancient by any standard, older than the Dominion itself, the Kethra claimed. The stone had been worn smooth by 4,000 years of feet and ceremony, and the particular kind of weight that history puts on a surface when enough of it accumulates. Around its perimeter stood the war leaders of 12 allied species, their delegations arrayed behind them like a gallery of everything evolution could produce when it tried hard enough, and in entirely the wrong directions. There were things that resembled insects enlarged to the point of philosophical offense, things that existed in a gaseous state and registered their presence as a shimmer in the air. Things that were crystalline, that caught the pale moonlight and refracted it into colors that human eyes could see, but human brains did not have categories for. And then there were the humans. 43 of them, all that remained of the 9th Expeditionary after the Battle of the Kethra Throat, standing in a ragged line behind General Yolanda Marsh, who held herself as though her spine had been replaced with a steel I-beam, and her eyes had been replaced with something that had no specific temperature, but was not warm. Marsh had the face of someone who had been making impossible calculations for a very long time, and had made her peace with the impossibility part, but not with the calculations. She wore her rank the way she wore everything, as a tool, not an ornament. Marcus was not supposed to be on the choosing ground. He was supposed to be on perimeter watch, which was where sergeants went when generals needed the people who asked questions at a distance from the people who had to answer them. But the Kethra had agreed to the ceasefire terms only under one condition, and that condition had been explained to the assembled 9th 40 minutes ago, and the 42 other surviving members had looked at General Marsh with expressions ranging from disbelief to barely suppressed fury, and she had looked back at them with the expression of someone doing arithmetic in their head that was coming out wrong no matter how many times they ran it. One representative of the human forces, she had said, clipping each word like she was cutting wire, will participate in the choosing right. What does that mean? Corporal Yemi Ademi had asked. Ademi was 22 and from Lagos, and had the specific quality of someone who would ask a direct question in any situation regardless of how much everyone else in the room wanted to avoid asking it. Marcus appreciated this about her. It means one of our people walks onto the choosing ground, the Kethra open their prize vault, and our representative selects one of the royal captives as a bond companion for the duration of the treaty period. Marsh paused. It is how the Kethra have sealed alliances for 4,000 years. We refuse, they resume offensive operations within the hour. The silence that followed had been very loud, the specific kind of loud that silence gets when nobody in a room wants to be the one to say the thing everyone is thinking. Bond companion, Marcus had said from the back of the group. He said it carefully the way you test ice. Not a diplomatic arrangement, nothing more than what it sounds like. The general's eyes had found him with the precision of targeting software. Their people, Vale, prisoners of war from species the Kethra have conquered over 4 centuries of expansion. The choosing right transfers their custody to the selecting party. Theoretically gives them protection and agency they don't have in the vault. Theoretically. Most things in diplomacy are theoretical until they aren't. Her eyes had not moved from him. The alternative is that the ceasefire ends, we resume a conflict we were losing, and the 17 warships currently in orbit above this settlement begin a planetary interdiction. A beat. Do you have a better option, Sergeant? He had not. He had known it before he spoke, which was the honest version of why he'd spoken. Not because he thought there was an alternative, but because someone in the room had to say it out loud, and he had always been the one who did that. He had ended up on the choosing ground because he had been the one asking questions, which General Marsh had apparently interpreted as volunteering. He had a theory that she had been right, and that he had simply not been honest with himself about it. He was 31 years old, and he had been a soldier for 9 years, and he had been in situations that required a particular kind of honesty about what you actually were and what you were actually willing to do, and he had come to the same conclusion today that he had come to in all those other situations. He would go. He would be the one who went. Now he stood 20 meters from the prize vault, an archway of dark metal set into a temporary structure the Kethra had erected overnight, hung with the silver and black banners of the Dominion's treaty protocols, and he watched the vault's interior slowly fill with pale light as the ceremony reached its opening phase. The light was the cold blue-white of bioluminescence, and it made everything it touched look like it was underwater, which Marcus found symbolically appropriate. The war leader of the Kethra was a creature named Arvith, and Arvith stood 8 feet tall with 4 upper limbs articulated in ways that suggested a different evolutionary relationship with the concept of joints, and a chest cavity that appeared to breathe independently of the rest of its body, which was disconcerting in the specific way that things are disconcerting when they force you to reassess what you assumed about basic biology. It wore armor the color of dried blood. It spoke in a voice like a pipe organ being played underwater, and the translator devices the Dominion's diplomatic corps had distributed turned this into something flat and clear and drained of its original character, which Marcus thought was probably a mercy. "The choosing right begins," Arvith announced, its words arriving in 18 languages simultaneously. Representatives of the allied and treaty-pending species will approach the vault in order of military distinction. They will select from among the available royal captives. The captives have been prepared and presented. The choosing is irrevocable. In order of military distinction. Marcus had known that was how it would go. The Kethra had rated the human forces' military distinction quite low, given that the 9th Expeditionary had technically been losing for the past 6 months before the ambush at the throat that had forced the ceasefire. An ambush that had cost the 9th significantly to execute, and had produced a result that felt more like falling forward than victory. He would be choosing last. He had known that for 40 minutes, and had spent those 40 minutes doing the same arithmetic General Marsh had done. The first to approach was a war commander from the Thessaly Collective, a creature like a mantis enlarged and given opinions, its selection process involving a complex series of antenna movements that concluded in about 4 seconds. It chose something small and silver-furred from the vault's interior and returned to its delegation with the efficiency of someone checking an item off a list. The second was from the Voreth Union itself, choosing quickly, without apparent emotion. The third, fourth, fifth, each selecting something rare or obviously prized, things that caught the light, things that seemed to radiate status even through the vault's archway. Marcus watched each selection with the patience he had developed over 9 years of military service for things he could not change and could only observe. By the 8th selection, the pattern was clear. The vault's inhabitants, 12 of them he had counted, were being chosen in roughly the order of their assessed value, like goods in an auction arranged highest to lowest. Things that glittered went first. Things that carried names that resonated through the gathered delegations went second. Things that were connected, politically or biologically, to power went next. Marcus was doing arithmetic. By the time the 12th delegation was done, the one nobody wanted would be the one left for him. He was trying to figure out what that meant. He was trying to figure out what he was going to do with a royal captive from a species he'd never heard of for a treaty period that would last, optimistically, 2 standard years. He was trying to figure out what he was going to say to that person, because it seemed like the kind of situation where what you said mattered and he did not have a script. "Human representative," said the translator in his ear, dry and automatic. "You are cleared to approach the vault." He stood up. He adjusted the rifle on his shoulder habit and walked toward the archway. What nobody had told Marcus, what the briefing documents and the general's clipped explanation had not conveyed, was that the prize vault smelled even stronger than the battlefield, like old electricity and something that might have been fear if fear had a chemistry. The smell hit him at the archway and he breathed through it consciously, the way you do when you walk into a hospital or a prison, and the accumulated meaning of the space is in the air itself. The archway was 3 meters tall, built for species that made humans look compact, and when he walked through it the air changed texture. The temperature dropped 2 degrees. The sound of the ceremony outside became a murmur, and then a silence. The vault was not a vault, it was a corridor. He walked it slowly, letting his eyes adjust, because the pale light from outside had been ambient, and what existed in here was something dimmer and more particular. Individual light sources placed near each of the captives' alcoves, illuminating them in isolation, like displays in a museum that had very poor ethics. The alcoves were carved into the corridor walls, 3 feet deep, each with a plaque beside it in Kethra script with Dominion's standard translation underneath. 11 alcoves were empty now. The chosen ones had been led out through a different passage, presumably. He didn't think about that. The 12th alcove held a girl. She was sitting on the floor of her alcove with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up, and her arms resting on her knees, in the posture of someone who had been sitting that way long enough that it was no longer a choice, but simply how they were. She was watching him approach with eyes the color of deep water where the light starts giving out, a dark, translucent blue-green that caught the alcove light and gave nothing back. They were eyes that had been watching things for a long time, carefully, and had developed the particular quality of eyes that see through rather than at. She was humanoid in the way that a great many species in oxygen-nitrogen atmospheres were humanoid, because evolution apparently had opinions about bilateral symmetry and upright posture that transcended the specific chemistry involved. She was roughly his height, which he noticed because he was used to the Kethra and the Thessali and the scale they occupied. Her skin was a pale gray-violet, the color of clouds an hour before serious weather, and it had a faint luminescence that was probably natural and probably beautiful in a context that was not this one. Her hair was black and cut practically short, close to her skull on the sides and longer on top. Her hands, resting on her knees, were long-fingered and still. She wore a plain gray garment that was obviously not what she'd come in with, a standard-issue Kethra captive tunic, rough fabric, no ornamentation, nothing that acknowledged who she was or had been. It was the kind of garment that was specifically designed to remove context from a person, and she wore it with the specific dignity of someone who had decided that the garment was irrelevant to the wearer. There was a small plaque beside her alcove. He looked at it. The Kethra script resolved into standard through the small translator patch on his jacket, and he read, "Designation, Sira Val 3rd Daughter House of Itharan Vorath Outer Territories. Political status, Minor Noble Non Central House. Combat status, Non Combatant. Specialized function, Research. Assessment, Low Strategic Value. Ransom potential, Minimal, Not Recommended." He read it twice, then he looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who had read that plaque and had been reading it for long enough to have opinions about every word of it. "Your last," she said. Her translator was apparently active. The words arrived in his ear in clear, unaccented standard, without the half-second delay of real-time translation. Either she had a very good device or she had learned standard directly, and looking at her, he thought it was probably the latter. "Yeah," he said. "Everyone else passed me over." "I can see that. There was a Thessali commander earlier who looked at me for approximately 1 second before choosing the Riekan delegate from Alcove 4. She paused. The Riekan delegate wept loudly for 6 hours after being selected. I was able to hear it through the wall. Another pause. I did not weep at all. I am uncertain what conclusion to draw from this. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he did something that occurred to him as he did it rather than before, which was that he crouched down so they were at eye level, her on the floor, him on one knee. Standing over someone who was already sitting on the floor felt like a power statement he wasn't interested in making. The rifle was awkward at this angle, and he shifted it to the other shoulder. "What's House of Itheron?" he said. Something small moved in her expression. Not suspicion exactly, more like the recalibration of an expectation. Minor noble house, outer territories as the plaque says, not wealthy, not politically connected. The outer territories have 3 parliamentary seats in the Voreth central government. My house holds none of them. She said it all without inflection, the way you recite coordinates, just facts, arranged in their factual order. My oldest sister married into the Voreth central line. She has 3 seats now, through her husband. My second sister commands a border patrol fleet. She has military distinction and operational authority over a significant portion of Voreth's frontier. She looked at him steadily. I am a research specialist. I have papers and data and 6 years of specialized analysis that nobody here has a metric for. What did you research? She looked at him. The deep-water eyes considered him in the way that eyes consider things when they're deciding something. The plaque doesn't specify, she said. Nobody asked. He stayed on one knee and looked at her. The corridor was quiet. Outside, the ceremony was concluding. He could hear the formal cadences of Arvith's closing remarks arriving muffled through the archway. He had maybe 3 minutes before someone came to find him. Siraval, he said. Yes. I'm Marcus Vale. Sergeant, 9th Expeditionary. I'm the last one choosing and you're the last one here, so I'm going to be direct with you. I don't know what a bond companion arrangement looks like. I don't know what the treaty terms require and what they don't. I don't know what the next 2 years are going to look like for either of us. He met her eyes. But I know you've been in this corridor for 11 days reading a plaque that says you're not recommended, and whatever you researched, that's not what you are. Her expression shifted again. This time it was more significant, not the micro-movement of before, but something that involved her whole face, briefly, before she brought it back. You don't know what I am, she said. You spoke to me for 4 minutes. No, he agreed, but I'm listening. Which is apparently more than most of the people who came through here did. A pause long enough that he counted it, 4 seconds. There was a Voreth Union delegate in the 7th position, she said. He stopped at my alcove and looked at the plaque for 30 seconds. I thought he was going to choose me. He read the plaque and walked away. She looked at her hands. I did not show that it mattered, but it mattered. I know, he said. How do you know? Because you just told me, and because you've been sitting up straight for 11 days, and that takes something. She looked at him again with those careful, deep eyes. The look had something new in it. At this point, she said quietly, being chosen at all is an improvement. He stood up. He looked at the plaque one more time, not recommended, and then at her. Okay, he said, I choose you. The reaction from the Kethra delegation was the diplomatic equivalent of a shrug. Arvith completed the closing ceremony with the efficiency of something that has performed the same ritual many thousands of times. Formal acknowledgments, documents signed in triplicate across 3 different legal systems, a small flat token exchanged that symbolized the transfer of custody under Dominion law, and then it was done. Marcus was standing outside the vault with Siraval beside him, and the pale moonlight overhead, and the gathered delegations dispersing in their various directions, moving with the collective purposefulness of entities that had gotten what they came for and were ready to be elsewhere. General Marsh appeared at his shoulder. She looked at Siraval, a soldier's look, fast and comprehensive in cataloging. Her expression communicated several things, most of them in the direction of "this is more complicated than I anticipated, and I am already calculating." "Research specialist," Marsh said, careful. "Third daughter," Marcus said. "Non-central house, low strategic value. Not recommended. The Voreth central line will need to confirm her status before we can." "Her family is in the outer territories," Siraval said, without particular hostility, the flat directness of someone delivering information. "The Kethra have been blockading the outer territories for 8 months. Communication with them will require routing through 3 relay stations, 2 of which are in contested space. The central line in Voreth will likely not prioritize my retrieval, as I am not connected to them politically, and my house has no leverage to compel urgency." She looked at Marsh with the calm that is very different from passivity, the calm of someone who has had 11 days to understand their situation completely. "I am aware of where I stand. I am not asking for assurances I know you cannot give." Marsh looked at Marcus with the expression of someone reassessing a subordinate's judgment upward. "She'll be housed with the civilian liaison section," Marsh said. "Sergeant Vale is your primary point of contact for any needs or concerns about your treatment and situation." She paused. "If your concerns are about Sergeant Vale—" "I bring them to you," Siraval said. Marsh looked at her. Something in the general's expression shifted slightly, the recognition of someone who had done the arithmetic quickly. "Yes," she said, "you do." "I won't have concerns about Sergeant Vale," Siraval said. "Not with certainty, the way someone states a preference or a guess, with the specificity of an observation." He crouched down in the corridor. Nobody crouches down. Marsh looked at Marcus again. Marcus looked at Marsh. "Get her settled," Marsh said. The 9th Expeditionary's forward base was a collection of prefab modules and repurposed alien construction that had been accumulating on the moon's surface for 14 months, which meant it had the particular aesthetic of a place that had been built quickly and then survived on stubbornness. The prefab panels didn't match where they'd been replaced. Power conduits ran exposed along certain walls because the housing material had run out. The floors were a patchwork of original construction and improvised reinforcement in 3 different shades of gray. The whole compound had a texture that the new liaison attaches inevitably described as rough, and that Marcus thought of as honest. A place that showed what it was, unambiguously, because it had been too busy existing to worry about presentation. He walked Siraval through it and watched her look at things. She looked at things the way an engineer looks at things, not decoratively, not with the vague appreciation of someone taking in scenery, but structurally. Her eyes moved to seams and junctions, to the places where panels had been joined and the joinery showed, to the power conduits and the particular way they were routed, to the load-bearing improvisation that held sections together where the original design hadn't anticipated long-term use. She was reading the base the way you read a document, and she was reading it fast, and her face was doing the small, focused work of someone absorbing information that interests them. She paused at a junction box where the power regulation unit had been removed and replaced with something that appeared to have originated from a Kethra supply crawler, darker metal, different form factor, connected to the base's infrastructure with a junction adapter that Marcus had always assumed was fine because Akwu had installed it and Akwu was the engineer. Siraval stopped in front of it and looked at it for 3 full seconds. She did not touch it. She looked at it the way you look at text, reading. "Did someone reverse the polarity on the secondary draw circuit?" she said. Marcus stopped walking. "What?" "This regulation unit." She still didn't touch it, just looked. "It's a Kethra P-series. The P-series is designed to pull power in a unidirectional flow from primary to secondary. Your base infrastructure runs a bidirectional draw because the prefab design assumes standard gravity compensators that your moon doesn't have, so you're running a modified draw pattern. She turned her head to look at him. Whoever installed this reversed the secondary draw circuit to reconcile the conflict. It works, but that configuration creates a resonance accumulation in the primary coil. The coil doesn't show symptoms for a long time and then it fails rapidly. A pause. I am simply noting it. He looked at the junction box. He had walked past it approximately twice a day for 6 weeks and seen a junction box. How do you know what the P-series pull configuration is? She looked back at the box. I spent 4 years analyzing HFY energy systems, she said. The P-series regulation module is in the 3rd chapter of my efficiency analysis. He stared at her. She looked at him with the careful eyes. The plaque, she said, did not specify what I researched. He looked at the junction box for a long moment. Then he looked at her. She was watching him with the particular patience of someone who has said the important thing and is now waiting to see if the person they said it to is going to understand why it matters. Come on, he said. I need to introduce you to our engineer. Corporal Tessa. Akwu had the perpetually exhausted look of someone responsible for keeping too many things running on insufficient supply, which was precisely her situation. She was 28, from Accra, and she had the rare quality among engineers of being able to explain what was wrong with something in terms that non-engineers understood without making the non-engineers feel slow for needing the explanation. She also had a workbench that was organized with the intensity of someone who would do violence to defend its system, and she looked up from it when Marcus appeared in the doorway with Siraval. She noticed the junction box, Marcus said. Akwu looked at Siraval with the sharp interest that engineers develop when someone demonstrates that they have noticed something the engineer already knows is a problem. Which one? P-series adapter. Secondary draw circuit reversal. A silence. Akwu set down her tool. How much does she know about the P-series? She wrote the efficiency analysis on it. Akwu looked at Siraval. Siraval looked back at Akwu. Some kind of assessment happened between them that was faster and more technical than Marcus could follow. How long? Akwu asked. 3 weeks, Siraval said. Maybe less if you have another high-demand event from the communications array. The resonance buildup accelerates under load. She paused. You need a replacement coil or a P-series unit that hasn't been reconfigured. We don't have one. Supply routes have been blocked since the blockade started and we can't. I can reproduce the fabrication schematics for the P-series from memory, Siraval said. The regulation module is not a complex component if you have the exact specifications and adequate alloy stock. I would need a fabrication unit capable of working with high-conductivity alloy. She looked around the engineering bay with the quick reading look she had used on the base. I see 2 units that appear capable. I would need approximately 3 hours. A pause. If that is acceptable. Akwu looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Siraval. Why are you not recommended? He said. The question came out quieter than he meant it to, less practical and more personal, because that was what it actually was. Siraval looked at him. Because the HFY prize vault is organized by political leverage and combat status, she said. I have neither. I have technical knowledge about HFY energy systems that I have been carrying for 14 months in captivity with nowhere to apply it. She looked around the engineering bay, the conduits and the fabrication units, and the organized workbench, and the honest structure of a place that was kept running by people who knew what they were doing. Until now. Okay, Marcus said, show us. She reproduced the schematics from memory in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Akwu spent the 3rd hour cross-referencing everything she could verify against the base's technical database, with the expression of someone reading a proof that's coming out right in ways they hadn't expected. She verified the coil dimensions, the conductivity specifications, the junction tolerances. She verified the draw circuit configuration that would correct the problem rather than reverse it incorrectly. She verified the alloy composition ratios. "This is right," Aku said, setting down the verification pad. "I can't check everything. I don't have the reference material for the Kethra P series for obvious reasons, but everything I can check is exactly right." "The parts you cannot verify are also right," Siraval said without heat. "But independent confirmation is reasonable." They fabricated the module the next morning. Siraval supervised the fabrication process with the quiet authority of someone who has built things before and knows the difference between a correct build and a slightly incorrect one. She spoke to the fabrication unit's operator, a private named Chen Feng who was 19 and extremely careful, in the precise shorthand of someone who respects careful people and adjusts their communication accordingly. The module fit the junction box with the particular satisfying precision of something built to exact specifications rather than adapted from something else. Aku installed it. The base's secondary power grid stabilized for the first time in 6 months. The hum that had been present in certain sections of the base infrastructure, the hum that everyone had grown accustomed to enough to stop hearing, was gone. Aku stood in front of the junction box and looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Siraval. "Thank you," she said. Siraval looked slightly surprised. It was the first time Marcus had seen her look surprised. It passed quickly. "You're welcome," she said, and then, with the small shift in expression that he was beginning to read, "It was good to use it." General Marsh heard about it by noon. She came to find Marcus in the afternoon, appearing at the doorway of his quarters with the look of someone who has reassembled a briefing in their head and found it significantly different from the first time. "Tell me," she said. He told her, Kethra Energy Systems, the efficiency analysis, 4 years of specialized research, the full technical library reproducible from memory. Marsh was quiet for a moment that had texture to it. The same Kethra Energy Systems that power their offensive fleet. Their offensive fleet, their base infrastructure, their weapons charging systems, their shield generation, their communications encryption, she mentioned that too. "Their shield generation," Marsh repeated. "Yes." Another quiet moment, this one longer. "We have been trying to analyze Kethra shield and weapon systems for 14 months because we cannot get our hands on actual hardware. We captured one supply crawler 6 months ago, and it took us 3 weeks to pull anything usable from it because nobody on our side speaks Kethra systems." "She speaks Kethra systems. She wrote the language, some of it." Marsh looked out across the base with the expression of someone recalculating a sum that just came out differently than it had on every previous calculation. "Get me a meeting. Tomorrow morning, full intelligence staff, everything on the table." "Yes, sir." She turned to leave, then Vale. "Sir, you chose well." "I chose last," he said. She looked at him over her shoulder. "Same thing sometimes," she said, and left. Siraval's knowledge was not a trickle. It was a reservoir that had been dammed for 14 months in a Kethra containment facility, and then 11 days in a prize vault. And when the dam was opened, carefully, professionally, with Marsh's intelligence team seated around the briefing table and asking calibrated questions, what came out was comprehensive in the way that 4 years of dedicated specialized study produces. She was systematic. She laid out what she knew in the order she knew it, from the most foundational elements of Kethra energy architecture up through the specific operational configurations of their current fleet deployment. She used the holographic display with the ease of someone who spent years working with technical visualization tools. She did not simplify or condescend. She asked the intelligence team what they already knew and built from there, which was the mark of someone who understood that the point of sharing knowledge was not the knowledge but the understanding. The room was quiet in the particular way that rooms get when everyone in them has just realized that the situation is different than they thought. If you introduce an interrupt signal at 3.7 gigacycles, Siraval said, using a light stylus to indicate a node in the holographic display of a Kethra assault ship's power architecture, into the primary feed relay here, this junction, the cascade propagation takes 11 seconds to reach the secondary buffer network. The secondary buffer network in current generation Kethra vessels has no independent power source. It draws exclusively from the primary architecture. She looked around the table. After the cascade reaches it, shields drop, weapons systems go offline, emergency propulsion falls to 15% capacity. How long? Said Major Chen from Tactical Operations. The window before emergency restoration protocols activate is approximately 90 seconds per vessel. The protocols are well designed. After 90 seconds, the ship returns to operational status. She looked at the display. But 90 seconds is sufficient for significant tactical action if the action is prepared. And the interrupt signal origin must be introduced from within 4 kilometers of the target vessel. The signal dissipates over distance. But the signal itself can be generated from hardware. You already have standard human communications equipment with a frequency modification. She paused. I can provide the modification parameters and help build the signal devices. The modification is not trivial, but it is achievable with materials available in your engineering facility. The room was quiet again. 17 ships, Marsh said. 17 Kethra warships currently positioned above this moon. You would need 17 interrupt signal units, each deployed within 4 kilometers of its target vessel, with coordinated simultaneous activation. The window is 90 seconds and begins the moment the cascade initiates, not the moment you begin the deployment. She looked at Marsh. You would need tactical planning to use the window effectively. How long to build the units? Siraval looked at Akwu, who was sitting at the far end of the table with the expression of someone already calculating. With adequate materials and the base fabrication units. 3 days, Akwu said. Maybe 2.5 if we work continuous shifts. 2 days, Siraval said. I will work with your engineering team directly. The design is straightforward once the specifications are set. She looked at Marsh. I have been designing these units in my head for the past 3 days. I simply needed access to a fabrication facility. The briefing continued for 2 more hours. Marcus sat at the far end of the table and watched the officers watch Siraval, and watched the subtle recalibrations happening in real time behind their eyes as they adjusted what they thought they knew. About the Kethra, about the situation, about the bond companion the human sergeant had chosen last from the prize vault because there was no one else to choose. He caught Siraval's eye across the table once midway through. She was in the middle of explaining shield frequency architecture. She looked at him with the expression that was not quite a smile but occupied adjacent territory. He gave her a small nod, meaning, I see you. Meaning, this is what I saw when I crouched down. Her expression shifted fractionally before she looked back at the display. Meaning, I know. Meaning, thank you for seeing it before this room did. The treaty was technically holding. The Kethra's definition of holding appeared to include aggressive repositioning of their fleet above the settlement, in a configuration that any tactical analyst would identify as pre-interdiction staging, and Arvith had communicated through diplomatic channels that this was navigational adjustment, and Marsh had communicated back that she noted it with concern. This exchange had been ongoing for 4 days. Siraval and Akwu and 3 other base engineers worked in the engineering bay through those 4 days with the sustained focus of people building something on a timeline. Siraval set the specifications and supervised the fabrication. Akwu executed. The 3 other engineers adapted to Siraval's communication style, with the speed that competent people adapt to someone more competent than them, when the situation makes the hierarchy of knowledge clear. Marcus was there. Not as a guard, she had been clear about that, and she was right, and he had acknowledged it, but as a presence. Someone nearby who was not treating her as an asset or an inconvenience or a function. He had understood what she meant in the corridor when she sat up straight for 11 days. It takes something, and the something can run low, and having a person who sees you as a person rather than a capacity helps the something replenish. "You found the junction box yourself," he said on the second day. She was calibrating a component, her hands unhurried and exact. "The first day, you noticed it on the walk-in." "Yes." "How many other things did you notice?" She glanced at him without stopping her work. "Would you like the list?" "Is it long?" "Comprehensive. A beat. Your ventilation in the eastern section is drawing inefficiently because someone rerouted a duct that was originally designed for a larger module. Your communications array is running 11% over its thermal tolerance during peak hours because the cooling system was designed for lower data traffic than you currently need. Your water reclamation system has a filtration unit that is 6 weeks past its service interval." She set the component down and looked at it, checking. "I noticed these things in the first hour. I did not say them immediately, because I was aware that walking through someone's home and immediately cataloging everything that is wrong with it is not typically well received." He looked at her. "This isn't your home." "No," she picked up the component again, "but you let me walk through it. That is worth something." He thought about that for a moment. "You've been carrying all of it, everything you know, for over a year." "Knowledge does not expire," she said. "It waits." She looked up at him briefly. "I am not patient by nature. I prefer applying things to storing them, but I have had considerable practice with waiting." 11 days in a vault," he said. 11 months before that in a containment facility. She said it without self-pity, which was the most accurate delivery it could have had. The Kethra were not cruel. They were indifferent. I was assessed and categorized and stored. My requests for access to research materials were denied because research specialists do not require research materials in a containment facility. A pause. My requests for access to Voreth diplomatic channels were denied because my family has no leverage to compel response. Another pause. My requests to be told what was happening were not denied. They were simply not answered. Marcus was quiet. "I am not telling you this for sympathy," she said, looking back at her work. "I am telling you because you asked about carrying things, and that is what I was carrying, and now I am not." She fit 2 components together with a precise click. "It is considerably lighter." On the 4th day, the Kethra moved. Not a violation of treaty terms, technically, but Marsh's analysts identified the new formation as the exact configuration the Kethra had used in the 48 hours before every one of their 7 planetary interdictions in the past decade. Arvith communicated that the repositioning was a navigational adjustment related to the moon's gravitational field. Nobody in the Ninth's command structure believed this. The next communication they sent Arvith was a request for clarification of intent. The response took 6 hours and said nothing. Marsh called Marcus in at 300. "How close is she?" "Finished the 13th unit 2 hours ago. She's working on the 14th. She needs 15 minimum to have any tactical effect. She knows she's not stopping." "How much time?" "The fleet formation reaches optimal interdiction positioning in approximately 16 hours. He looked at Marsh. "She'll be done." Marsh looked at the tracking display above her desk, the 17 bright points hanging above the settlement like a question that had been on the table for too long. "What do you need?" "Access to the encrypted frequency band for the interrupt signals. Right now, she's working around our security protocols every time she runs a calibration test, and it's costing her 40 minutes per unit. Drop the protocol restriction on Bay 3's communications access." Done what else? Nothing else. Marsh looked at him. You trust her. I trust what I've seen. That's not an answer. It's the only honest answer. He met Marsh's eyes. She was in a cage for over a year. Before that, she spent 4 years building expertise that everybody undervalued because it didn't fit their metrics. She's not doing this to manipulate us. She's doing this because she's been carrying it and she finally has somewhere to put it. A beat. And because she's angry at the Kethra in the specific, controlled way that makes people very precise and very effective. Marsh looked at the tracking display. Can we trust angry? Depends on what the anger is aimed at, he said. And what the person does with it. And what does she do with it? He thought about hands working with the unhurried precision of someone who had decided to be exact rather than fast because exactness was the point. She builds things that work, he said. Marsh nodded, slowly and with the weight of someone who has decided to bet on a calculation. Get her what she needs. 15 units in 12 hours. Siraval worked without stopping in the sustained, economical way of someone who has trained themselves not to rush and not to stall, and to stay exactly in the narrow band between those two mistakes where real work happens. She spoke to Akwu and the engineers in the shortened language of a shared project, the kind of shorthand that develops when people work closely on something difficult, and the full versions of sentences become unnecessary. By hour 8, Akwu was anticipating what she would need before she asked for it. By hour 11, Private Chen Fang had started double-checking his own work against what he had learned from watching her, and the error rate on the fabrication outputs was the lowest the Bay had seen in 6 months. Marcus brought her food at the 10-hour mark. She did not stop working to eat it. She ate one-handed without looking up, with the absent efficiency of someone who has learned to service the body without interrupting the mind. He sat on a nearby workbench and watched the Bay work and did not say anything, because the Bay had its rhythm, and he was not going to disturb it. She set down the last completed unit at the 12-hour mark. She stood back and looked at the 15 of them in a row on the fabrication floor. Her expression was the expression of someone looking at a thing they have built and checking it against what they intended to build and finding the match satisfactory. Not triumphant. Satisfied, which is quieter and more durable. 15, Marcus said. 15, she agreed. I lost 2 units in the second batch. The alloy stock was lower grade than the specification preferred. I could have compensated, but I did not want to introduce tolerance risk. She looked at him. 15 ships out of 17. The remaining 2 will retain full operational capability during your window. That's still significantly better odds than you have now. Yes. She picked up one of the units, turned it in her hand, small, unremarkable looking, the size of a human fist. The activation is simultaneous. All 15 signals must trigger within 2 seconds of each other, or the cascade initiation will be staggered, and the Kethra ships will begin emergency protocols in response to the first activation before the others have fired. She looked at him steadily. You will need tight coordination. We can do tight coordination. The 90-second window. She set the unit back down. Do not waste it. He looked at the row of units. He thought about the 6 months before the throat, the grinding, incremental losses, the feeling of fighting a war against something that didn't have the limitations you had, and didn't get tired, and didn't make the kind of mistakes that soldiers made, because soldiers were human and humans made mistakes from being human. He thought about what it felt like to be in that, and then to have a conversation in a corridor where someone told him exactly what the Kethra's mistakes actually were. We won't, he said. She looked at him. For a moment neither of them said anything. The bay was quiet around them. The engineers had stepped back, giving them something, probably without being aware of it. The moon's dim sun was just beginning to come through the bay's high windows. Marcus, she said. It was the first time she had used his given name without the rank. He registered it the way you register a change in air pressure. Yeah. When this is done, she stopped, looked at the units, looked at him. When this is done, I want to tell you something. Tell me now. When this is done, she said again firmly, there will be time. He nodded, okay. She looked at the units again. There will be time, she said, quieter, more to herself than to him, like a promise she was making. What followed was not elegant. Wars rarely are, and this was a tactical action inside a fragile ceasefire with a fleet of 17 warships overhead and 90 seconds to accomplish something that would have taken 90 minutes to plan properly under other circumstances. The 9th Expeditionary scrambled 11 assault craft, all that were flight-ready, more than half of them running on Aqua's creative engineering and the particular stubbornness of machines that had been kept going by people who refused to let them stop. The 15 interrupt units were distributed, the deployment coordinates assigned, the timing synchronized to 4-decimal precision. Marsh ran the operation from the command center with the focused economy of someone who has given all the orders that can be given and is now waiting for the people she trusts to execute them. Marcus flew the 7th craft. He had 9 years of flying things that were not designed to be flown the way he flew them, and he put the unit into its deployment position at 4 kilometers from target vessel 11 and checked his chronometer and waited for the count. The coordinated signal went out at 6:14 local time. 15 Kethra warships went briefly dark. He saw it happen, shields collapsing in a sequence that looked, from the outside, like lights going out in a building when the power fails, one section and then the next until the whole structure stood dark. Weapons offline. The ships drifting, suddenly passive, suddenly small in the way that powerful things become small when the power leaves them. 90 seconds. The 9th used them. The 4th assault craft took a hit from one of the 2 Kethra ships that remained fully operational. A glancing shot that sent it into an uncontrolled spin that Sergeant Torres pulled out of with the kind of cold nerve that you either have or you don't. The 9th craft took damage to its primary drive that would have been fatal if Adami hadn't done something inadvisable with the emergency thrust protocol that she would later describe as a creative reinterpretation of the manual. Marcus took a hit on the port wing of the 7th craft that compromised his steering by 30%, in which he flew around, because the alternative was not flying. 15 ships disabled, 2 operational. The math, as it turned out, was survivable. The Kethra fleet did not resume offensive operations. The 2 operational ships held position. Arvith's communication came 4 hours after the action. In the formal register, the Kethra reserved for significant realignments of position. They requested extended ceasefire. They requested technical clarification of the interrupt technology. They requested. This was the line that Marsh read twice and that Marcus read 3 times when she showed it to him. A direct session with both the human general and the Vorath research specialist currently under human treaty custody. They know she built it, Marcus said. They knew a Vorath specialist built something that disabled 15 of their warships simultaneously, Marsh said. They are currently rethinking a number of their assessment systems. She looked at him. She is going to be the most important person in the treaty renegotiation. Not recommended, he said. Not by their metrics, Marsh said. By ours, she's the whole conversation. He found her in the engineering bay afterward, sitting on a workbench with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up, the same posture as the alcove, except that everything else was different. The light was different. The air was different. She was different, or he could see her differently, which sometimes amounts to the same thing. She looked up when he came in. She had a data pad in her hands and she set it down. You said when it was done, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, I have been carrying something that I want to tell you, not about the systems or the treaty, something else. Okay. In the corridor, she said, when you crouched down, I told you that I was afraid you would look at the plaque and walk away. She looked at her hands. What I did not tell you was that when you did not walk away, when you asked about my house and about what I researched, I had to work very hard to stay composed, not because I was fragile. Because I had been in that vault for 11 days preparing myself for you to walk away. And when you did not, the preparation was unnecessary. And necessary preparations that turn out to be unnecessary take a moment to put down. He was quiet. I want you to know, she said, that I was not simply waiting for rescue. I was not sitting in that alcove hoping someone would come and see the potential the plaque missed. I was sitting in that alcove prepared to be left there and thinking about what I would do next if I was, because there is always a next. She looked up at him. But I am glad you came. I am glad you crouched down. I am glad you asked the question that nobody asked. What would you have done, he said, if I'd walked away? She considered it. Found another way, she said. There is always another way. It is slower and harder and requires more from the person who has to find it. A pause. But there is always another way. He sat down on the workbench across from her. The bay was quiet. The moon's light was coming through the high windows now, pale and clear. The rust orange of interdiction threat evenings gone, replaced by something that was just sky. For what it's worth, he said, the moment I read that plaque, not recommended, I started wondering what the Kethra were using to measure with. And the answer was obvious. They were measuring for what they valued, not what was actually there. She looked at him. Most systems do that. Value systems measure for the values of the people who built them. They cannot measure what they were not designed to see. You weren't designed into their system. No, a faint curve at the corner of her mouth. I am someone else's measurement entirely. He almost smiled. Whose? She tilted her head slightly. Apparently a human sergeant's, she said. One who asks questions and crouches down. The renegotiated treaty took 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, Siraval sat across from Kethra diplomatic advisors and spoke to them in their own technical language, and watched them recalibrate the way she had watched everyone recalibrate, the adjustment happening behind their eyes, the reassessment of a thing they had categorized and found now to be uncategorizable. Arvith held the private session it had requested. It looked at Marcus for a long moment before speaking. The human chose you last, it said to Siraval. The human chose me when he could choose, she said. Arvith considered this with the particular stillness of something very large, thinking carefully. The Dominion Prize assessment classified you as minimal value. Yes. The human did not use the Dominion assessment. The human made his own assessment. She glanced at Marcus. He was standing at her left shoulder in the posture of someone who is present without requiring attention. It is a human characteristic. They sometimes notice things that standard metrics miss. Arvith's 4 upper limbs moved in the contemplative pattern she had learned to recognize over years of studying Kethra behavior. This characteristic, Arvith said, has produced significant results. Yes, she said, it tends to. The treaty concluded with terms that nobody in the 9th Expeditionary would have believed 4 months earlier. The Kethra withdrew from blockade positions across the outer territories. The prize vault system was formally reviewed, not abolished, not immediately, but reviewed, which was the beginning of something. Siraval's family received communication from her for the first time in 15 months. She sat with the communication device for a long time after her message went out. Marcus found her on the observation deck, the high platform where you could see the moon's terrain in 3 directions and the sky in the 4th, standing in the clear night air looking up. He stood beside her and looked up too. The Kethra fleet had repositioned far to the east under treaty terms, and the sky above the settlement was open, genuinely open, not technically open, for the first time since any of them had arrived. Your family, he said. They are well. My sister Aravan lost 2 ships in the blockade actions. My oldest sister's household was not directly affected. Her voice was steady with the particular steadiness of someone holding something carefully. They thought I was likely dead. The Kethra do not communicate captivity status to non-priority families. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would be better. I told them what happened, she said after a while. The vault, the choosing right, the interrupt units. A pause. The human who chose last. He looked at her sidelong. Aravan asked why a human would choose a captive with minimal strategic value, a curve at the corner of her mouth. I told her that humans sometimes see past the metric to what is actually there. She said that was either wisdom or luck. I told her it was both. She looked at him. I also told her that the distinction between the two matters less than what you do with the outcome. What did she say to that? She said it sounded like something a philosopher would say. A pause. And then she said that she was glad someone found me. The stars were coming out as they stood there. Not all at once, but gradually, the way things become visible when the obstruction is removed, each one appearing as the sky deepened, until there were too many to count and still more coming. The stars that had been invisible behind the fleet's positioning were back, indifferent and permanent, and completely unconcerned with the 14 months that had just happened beneath them. What comes next, he said, for you? Treaty terms allow me transit back to Vorath when the formal period concludes. 2 months. She looked at the stars. I have agreed to consult with the 9th Technical Division in the interim, voluntarily. Not because the treaty. No. Because I want to. She turned to look at him directly. I have been carrying this knowledge for a very long time. It turns out that using it is considerably more satisfying than carrying it, and I find that I am not in any hurry. The moon's ambient light was the pale, clear kind that comes when the sky above a place is simply itself. No fleet, no threat, just the specific darkness of a moon that is a moon and nothing more. I chose you because you were there, he said. Last choice, only option. I know. But I also chose you because when I crouched down, you looked at me like you knew exactly what was happening and you weren't going to pretend you didn't. No performance. No appeal. Just here is who I am, here is what the situation is, here is what you're choosing. He looked at her. That was the choice, not the plaque, you. She was quiet for a moment. The wind on the observation deck moved through the silence, and it was the kind of wind that is just wind, not cold, not significant, just present. I want to tell you something, she said, and I want you to believe that I mean it without context or strategy. Okay. When you said I choose you, she looked at the stars. It was the first time in 14 months that I had been chosen for anything other than being a problem to be managed or a resource to be stored. A pause. I know you chose last. I know it was by default. I know the corridor gave you no alternative. She looked at him. And I know that none of that is why you chose. No, he said, it isn't. No matter what happens after this, she said, I am glad I was there. In that corridor, for those 11 days, a beat, even for the 11 days in the end because they ended this way. He thought about that, about the arithmetic, all the wrong sums, and then one that came out right. Same, he said. She looked at him. The stars were fully out now, and the sky above the settlement was clear, and the particular quality of the air on an unblockaded moon at night was the quality of air that has simply been itself and is waiting, patiently, for the next thing. And Siraval, who had been waiting patiently for longer than any of them, stood in it and looked like someone who had arrived somewhere. Not at a destination. Destinations were Vorath in 2 months, and the treaty work, and whatever came after. This was a different kind of arrival. The kind where you realize the waiting is over and you are now inside the thing you were waiting for, and the inside of it is different than you imagined and also exactly right. 3 months, he said. 2, she corrected, and then Vorath. And after Vorath. She looked at him for a long moment with the deep water eyes that gave nothing back except now, in the clear night air, gave back the stars. Unknown, she said, and then, but I have found that unknown is sometimes very different from unwanted. She looked at the sky. I will let you know. He nodded. They stood on the observation deck, and the stars were out, and the base hummed beneath them, with the quiet persistence of a place that had been built on stubbornness, and had survived on something more. The clear sky held everything it had always held, now that the obstruction was gone. It was very large and it was patient, and it did not care about prize vaults or treaty terms or the specific arithmetic of one soldier who had walked into a corridor and crouched down. But Marcus Vale cared about those things, and Siraval of the House of Itherin cared about them, and they stood together in the clear night of a moon where the impossible arithmetic had finally come out right, and the stars were out, and it was enough. Humanity had chosen last, and found what was actually there.